sometimes they mention Bosnia, but sometimes not. Uh, Rarely do they mention Rwanda. But we are having three people who will give us an in-depth analysis on the case of genocide for three areas: the Congo, Gaza, and the Sudan. And I believe these are very important areas because they're usually not talked about, even with the situation of Gaza, uh, notwithstanding the daily news that we get, it's still not referred as a genocide in network media. You may hear it on some talk shows, you may hear it on alternative media, social media, but not on CNN or Fox News or Los Angeles Times for that matter, New York Times very rarely. So we are going to have an expert analysis on these three areas of importance. And so we will have Niclette Mundabi, who will give us an analysis on the Congo, and I'll introduce her in a moment. Lubna Hammad on Gaza, and Dr. Alden Young in terms of the situation in the Sudan. So first, Niclette Mundabi. She's founder of the Mundabi Consulting Group, is an international business consultant, a fundraising strategist, and passionate advocate for social impact. Hailing from the Democratic Republic of Congo, her journey from grassroots initiatives to becoming a key player in African development embodies the resilience and innovation that MCG represents, the Mundabi Consulting Group. Niclette's leadership spans both the nonprofit and corporate sectors. As Director of Development at Eastern Congo Initiative, she helped raise over $4 million to support water, sanitation, healthcare, and economic development programs for conflict-ridden communities across North and Southern Kivu, the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, and her corporate experience as Africa Portfolio Manager at MoneyGram International provides her with deep insights into African diaspora financial flows and economic development, particularly in key markets such as Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, and Liberia. So we're very honored to have Ms. Niclette Mundabi, and please commence with your presentation. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, and really very impressive background and accomplishments and experiences. So we're very grateful to have your expertise shared with us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Brother Salam. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to first start by thanking the Islamic Center for Southern California for first of all, making sure we had the platform to speak about a topic that is very important to all of us that are here, because we are either representing or are closely tied to genocide in one way or another through our various countries that we're speaking about today. My name is Niclette Mundabi, as Brother Salam said. I'm originally from the Democratic Republic of Congo. I was born in Kinshasa, which is the western part of Congo. And I was raised in South Africa. So that's important to note because I think it already shows that my parents were always thinking of migration as a way to keep us safe and as a way to shield us and give us the best opportunities that they could afford us in terms of an upbringing. I'd like to share a couple of facts about the DRC. The DRC is right at the heart of the map of Africa. We are about 5 times the size of California, or 5.5 times the size of California. There's about 100 million plus people that currently live there at the moment. And we are also known for being a country that has been blessed with immense mineral wealth. We have over 1,100 minerals and precious stones that are found underneath our earth. And that has always made us, I think, a center of interest to anyone kind of in, around, or even outside of Africa looking in. Our story, I'm going to start with the story of like how we've actually come about to where we are today and what we're seeing unfold in the DRC. I'm going to start around the 15th century, where Congo, being known at the time as the Kingdom of Congo, was discovered by Portuguese explorers who found us on the map, and I think exported about 1 million plus slaves at the time from Central Africa to mainly Brazil, the Caribbean, and some came to the to the U.S. But a lot of those enslaved people were actually taken by force and taken to Brazil. The most consequential event, I think, of our modern times is happened at the Berlin Conference. I don't know if anybody knows, but in 1884, a bunch of European countries got together and sliced Africa up as if it was a pizza pie. And colonial powers basically colonized whatever countries they sought to pick. And we had the misfortune of being handed over to the king of a small kingdom called Belgium. And at the time, he had tricked everyone else by telling them that he intended to turn Congo into a free trade zone area, and that he was looking to civilize the people. What in fact happened was that he turned Congo into what I can only describe as a slave camp, where the population was expected to produce rubber primarily on the plantations. Were expected to farm rubber for export to other parts of the world. This was for the personal enrichment of the king. It came at the great expense of Congolese people. During this time, and this I think I could say in modern times, or at least in recent times, makes up the first episode of a major genocidal episode in the Congo, because about half the population was actually wiped out of the country because of the way the policies that the Belgians implemented at the time, the harsh conditions that Congolese people were expected to work under, the harsh productions that numbers they were supposed to meet in terms of target, and also were maimed if they didn't meet the quota, and just had inhumane treatment for about 20, 25 years. This led us to like pre-independence times. There was awareness brought around what the king of Belgium was actually doing, or what his policies were actually creating in terms of a humanitarian crisis in the Congo. And so once word got out, the push for independence began. And so this brings us to the 1960s. We have a young man called Patrice Lumumba, who led the push for independence. He not only was able to get us freed in terms of, get us declared as independent, but he also made a speech that I think many at the time found very disrespectful. At the time, it was presumed disrespectful to have a young African man speak to power in that way. And I think he paid the price about a year and a half later with his life. And so we see that whenever Congolese people have actually tried to assert their independence, there has been consequences by way of death. And it has enforced, I think, where what we see today and where we are today in terms of how the government reacts whenever a conflict arises. Shortly after that, a dictator took over. His name was Mobutu Sese Seko. He took over and ran the country for 33 years. He basically ran it, I would say, to the ground, unfortunately. This may be due to like lack of leadership experience. There was like endemic corruption that led to how the country was actually run, right? So again, a model that had been used before by the king that basically turned Congo into his personal wallet. And Mobutu took over and I think kept the same system, basically used the same model to enrich himself and his circle. And he was ousted in 1997 by a rebellion that was led by Laurent Désiré Kabila. They came in, took over the country. Mobutu was then, he escaped away to Morocco, where he died of cancer. And Laurent Désiré Kabila, in order to take over power, actually at the time, and I'm just going to reverse a little bit, because in 94, simultaneously, you have the Rwanda war and genocide also going on, next door to us, which spills over to the Eastern Congo, right? So this is also kind of the root of what we see today in the DRC, which is that you have ethnic conflict, you have regional conflict. It's become very complex. And I think this is also why the world finds it a little bit hard to keep up with what happens in Congo. It's that there's so many countries involved, and it's hard to point at one thing or one person as the basis for what is happening, what we see today. But either way, Kabila took over, was in power for 3 years, was assassinated, and his son took over, and basically oversaw the country for about 18 years until the current government that we have in place today took over. And I think in 2018, 2019, came into power and is currently dealing with the crisis that we see today. So, as I've mentioned, the Rwanda genocide or war that was happening in next door to us spilled some of that spilled over into the Congo. We have some Hutu tribes that have resettled in the Congo and have claimed to Congolese nationality. I think the government actually recognizes them as Congolese people as well, just due to the our intellect history. And today, that dynamic is actually contributing to some of what we see today in terms of the ethnic tension that we see in that region today. All right. And this is just like Congo's history tends to be very complex, but I've tried to basically summarize and condense it in a way that makes it very short, but clear as to what the major themes are in terms of the conflict we see there. Once Kabila took over in 2000, we've seen two major Congo wars. The first Congo War, which claimed about 6 million lives. It's been estimated 3 to 6 million lives, depending on whatever agency is being quoted. And we've seen that being largely due to mass displacement, disease, starvation that has happened because of the fighting, the regional fighting that has happened. Civilians tend to pay the price for that. And women, obviously, and children also tend to pay the price, either with their bodies or being forced into, the children being forced to become child soldiers as part of this conflict, right? There's also the economic aspect, which is that there is fight for regional control to be able to access the minerals, which is then used to power technology outside of the country. So those of us who live here in the West, we enjoy the latest devices. We enjoy all the innovation that Apple, Tesla, and all the other companies tend to come up with. But the other side, of the flip side of that, is that in Congo, it's either being like the minerals that are needed to go into these devices are being mined by hand by either children, women. It doesn't matter, right? You literally have whole families working on these mines. They are not properly equipped. They are not properly paid. They're exploited. And so what you have is a cycle of exploitation going on to basically feed technological innovation today, right? So this is also a major aspect of what we see happening in the DRC today. The second Congo War, there was a truce for a little bit, and then there was a second Congo War, which again, I think Dr. Mukwege, which some of you may know, Dr. Denis Mukwege, was basically a gynecologist that has come from Bukavu, from South Kivu. He is a Nobel Peace Prize recipient for the work that he's done to repair women who have been victimized by the sexual violence that had happened in the East for a long, long time. I think we estimate about 200,000 women that got raped. A lot more have obviously been either killed during the conflict and not been counted, but the ones that we have, the official number we have stands at about 200,000, which speaks to how Congolese bodies have been commodified in the process, right? It seems that when it comes to the Congo, although we take up so much space on the map, although we play an important role in terms of technology and innovation, the world tends to look at our stories as just another African war. And I think it's also, it doesn't really make the news in the way that it should, because there is almost compassion fatigue after 30 years of sustained, and I've gone through basically the last 300-400 years of what the history has been like for Congolese people, but there has been sustained cycle of violence that the country has been subjected to. And this is a way to just point out the fact that human lives, although should be equal and should be counted, you know, a death in the Congo should be as tragic as a death in Sudan and should be as tragic as a death in Gaza. But we have seen in the world that some deaths matter more than others. It is reported as if some lives matter or are more important than others. And in terms of Africa, I do think that the story of the DRC, despite efforts from the government and from key figures, Congolese nationals, to raise awareness to it, it still does not grab the attention it needs to grab in relation to what is actually happening on the ground. All right. And I'm going to switch over and talk about governance for a little bit. As I said, I've kind of gone over a succession of power from pre-independence to post-independence. Currently, we have a government that is being led by President Felix Tshisekedi. One of the most recent thing that he's been in the news for was that after President Trump offered a peace deal to Ukraine, that was basically a minerals for security exchange. Our government tried to pursue a similar deal, right? I have to say our government is pursuing diplomatic methods to resolving what is happening right now, simply because there are many parties involved, obviously. It's not as simple as taking up arms and going to create more death and destruction, which has not been has not really worked in the past. And I think diplomacy tends to at least bring about temporary peace. So that has been what has been pursued. I believe an agreement was signed on Friday to enact a ceasefire between M23, which is a Rwandan-backed rebel group that operates out of the Eastern Congo and has grievances with the government that they feel needs to be resolved through the way that they have chosen to do it, which is through a lot of violence. I'm going to stop there at the moment, just Brother Hammad, Salam. If there are any questions, any clarifications, or I can keep going.
Are there any questions, Sister Eric?
There are no questions.
Somebody's raised their hand. Stacy Woodley?
Yeah, so if you have a question, maybe you can type it in the chat or the question and answer, and then we can incorporate it into the program, inshallah.
Okay. Yeah, let me know. I think they're basically, I think what Niclette has outlined very meticulously and with clarity the three aspects of genocide, or actually four, and then what's happening internationally. The first is the targeted mass violence against specific ethnic groups. You mentioned the spillover from Rwanda, and mass killings, mutilations, destruction of entire villages have taken place, displacements, attacks, massacres by various militias. So you've had that. You've had sexual violence, and incredible how we've allowed 200,000 women to be raped, and that's not getting any attention, as Niclette mentioned, that that some deaths matter more than others, and definitely there's a devaluation of the life of people in the DRC. And then the state and how we've had a succession of governments, independence, post-independence, and so the state basically has failed to protect these communities, along with displacement. My understanding, Niclette, is there 6 million people are internally displaced in the DRC?
Yes, you have along the eastern border where we border Rwanda, Uganda. You have North and South Kivu, where the displacements primarily happen, and then also Ituri. So you have, and I don't know if you guys saw in the news a couple of years ago when a volcano exploded in Goma, and that also led to displacement. And so as the government with its limited resources and expertise tries to handle some of what happens on the ground, whenever you have a rebel group take up arms and reactivate their activities in the area, again, there's ongoing sustained, the people who are already in camps have to kind of deal with re-traumatization of having to be displaced in the first incident, and then having to deal with the repercussions of that displacement by being re-victimized really in the camps as well. So it feels like there's, especially for the people who are being displaced, there's almost nowhere to run as far as what they're having to face in terms of the violent rebel groups.
And it seems like the warlords are running rampant in the DRC, and they're profiting along with the foreign powers from the minerals and other precious metals in the area. Is that correct?
Yes, I would say, and I wrote an article on this a couple of weeks ago. The economic structure around how minerals are extracted in the DRC currently is very problematic, because in a way it incentivizes the smuggling of minerals to neighboring countries who then are able to sell it into a global supply chain, right? It seems like they've been acquired in a way that is clean, but unfortunately, they're basically conflict minerals that are being extracted at the expense of women, children, the devastation on families. I visited a village outside of Bukavu last year in my role as Director of Development at Eastern Congo Initiative. And there was basically a whole village of children who were left to their own devices, because not only are the fathers either working in the mines or having joined these groups or being forced to join these groups, but you also have children being left on their own to their own devices. You can see sometimes in some cases like visible starvation, and also again them being left open to sexual exploitation because there's no one really there to protect them while the parents are either trying to earn a living or the families are really being torn apart by this dynamic. And I think that's the price that is having to be paid by some of what we're seeing, the current economic model. And so obviously, and I don't want to, I think Congo, because it's labeled complex, I will say it involves multi-parties, and multi-parties are should be accountable to what we see. I think when I look at the Congo, it's something that I feel like we all have a hand in, simply because, like I say, either as consumers of the products that are eventually made from these minerals, or as buyers, as the warlords, as the government, there is an economic model that is enriching a lot of people, but it is at the expense, again, like I would say, of innocent civilians who really just want to live, humble lives, want to spend time with their families as everyone else in any other part of the world. And they're just not allowed to live that way. They're not allowed to live in peace because of almost like this constant hunger for technology and innovation.
We have a question. Why trust Western countries with the ceasefire? They only want access to the minerals.
That is, I guess, a sentiment that I would share. Like I said, I think the government, the current government, they're playing to their strength, which is trying to resolve this matter through diplomacy, and where they understand that there are limited resources that they can use, meaning we don't have an army that can actually defend our borders, which is a key weakness, obviously, in our country that creates instability in that region. And every single time, even when I mentioned the spillover from the Rwandan genocide that spilled over into our country, when Laurent Kabila came into the Congo to kick Mobutu out after 33 years of him being in power, he basically had to consolidate and attach himself to foreign armies to be able to do that. And I think another issue that we have in Congo is the constant interference, like foreign interference that maybe is well-intentioned, but almost always produces the same results, which means that people come in and see how rich this could make them, or see the vast amount of wealth that's present in the DRC, and and start to think in terms of their own interests, right? And I think this is where the Congo needs to figure out a different strategy to protecting the assets that we have in terms of mineral wealth, which I personally think means, investing a lot more into national security than we see today. But yeah, that's a great question. I don't really have the answer. The only thing I can say is this must be what the government feels like it has to do in order to kind of bring about an immediate ceasefire, because obviously, like I said, this is after 30 years of sustained violence, and I think they just want to get to a place where they kind of end it as soon as possible, and restabilize, what they can in terms of the situation on the ground.
Another question: Has the Republic of Congo considered collaborating with Burkina Faso? And if you can explain who Burkina Faso is for our audience.
Yes, Burkina Faso is a nation in West Africa, who I think were also colonized by the French, the former colony of France. They have always produced amazing leaders in terms of thought leadership, one. Two, in terms of like military resistance, they tend to have like colonels or military leaders that come in, take over the country. But even there, the cycle is always, it's always through coup d'etats that they come into power. And yes, I think our government has sought to see if they could partner up with Mali, with Burkina Faso, to see if they could come up with a solution. The issue there is that, the leader that's there, Ibrahim Traoré, just came in about 2 years ago. So I think he has his hands full. The size of Burkina Faso and Congo are also key, because Burkina Faso is much smaller than Congo. Congo has about 200 ethnic groups inside of our borders, and inserting yourself in something that is as I would say, as diverse as that sometimes can create problems, because you almost don't know like where to place yourself. There you go. Thanks for sharing the map. Yeah. And so you see that even if they wanted to help, I think just it'd probably have to be in terms of strategy, but I don't see them being able to kind of do more, outside of that, because they're also, the current president there is also trying to stabilize his own country.
So the Democratic Republic of Congo here is right in the middle of the continent. And where is Burkina Faso?
Burkina Faso, you'd have to scroll to the left.
Oh,
and above.
Yep.
So
wow.
Yeah, it's not a country that's close to us in terms of borders that would make them.
Oh, here it is. There it is. That's Burkina Faso. Okay, got it. And why is that important for DRC?
It's important because like I say, they tend to produce leaders who I think have a strength in implementing systems that are pro-Africans. And so it seems that because our government is struggling to kind of implement and defend our own people, it's better to go to someone who's kind of has proven experience in being able to do that for themselves. And so, I think that, so people kind of draw the connection. and want us to kind of, morph or at least create some sort of partnership. But as you can see with the geography, it wouldn't be as simple as that. It's not like there's a large number of armies that they have to spare to mobilize to Eastern Congo to help us deal with what we're seeing on the ground. And so I can also see why the Congolese government are actually trying to, use diplomacy instead.
And has the ICC, International Criminal Court, or the International Court of Justice been helpful in any of these cases?
Absolutely not. This is another part of how I think the DRC has, not to place blame, because again, we are a sovereign country, and I think we have a government in place that should be able to defend our borders. However, when you look at the ICC and the role in which they were meant to play in this, in terms of global governance, I think that there's been very little repercussions for any of the warlords, really, who have been named and shamed. They tend to be zero accountability to these people. They are basically left unscathed, or largely are still like living their lives as free people, even in terms, in light of what they have done in terms of like contributing to the regional instability, right? So I think the problem there is how do we get the ICC to kind of not cherry pick who gets to be held accountable, but to really do a concerted effort to bring about consequences to people who decide to profit off of conflict for personal interest.
And lastly, how has the Congo's relationship with France impacted the Congo's independence?
That's a great question. So I will go back and to the history I just gave on the Congo, that we were actually colonized by Belgium, right? So our primary problem is that France is backing what we would consider our enemies at the moment. And so the conflicting interests that are either like with neighbors, you have France either supporting them through military or funding military operations. That is something that I think the president has tried to deal with through diplomatic channels. I think it has been acknowledged publicly that Rwanda is playing a role in basically fueling the conflict in Eastern Congo. I think that was a step forward for us, just in terms of at least getting transparency as to who is behind what we see in Eastern Congo in terms of the instability. But we've also seen in recent months like some sanctions from European countries to Rwanda, trying to stem some of what they consider to be the financial backing of like M23 activities in the Congo. But yeah, I would like to see France obviously at least financially, separate themselves from backing people that we know are like known perpetrators of conflict in the Congo.
Well, Niclette, you've given us a tremendous lesson on the Democratic Republic of Congo and the surrounding area, and history that you really outlined for us, and gave us tremendous amount to think about. 6 million people have been killed in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and millions more displaced. And yet when we hear the term 6 million, we only think about the Holocaust, which was a terrible war crime in the 20th century. And yet this genocide has not gotten any attention.
Right.
I don't think the average American, if you ask them about the Democratic Republic of Congo, could tell you anything about it, where it is, what its history is, and what the situation is now. But you've given us that education in such a short period of time. So we're very grateful and thankful for your analysis and your suggestions in terms of moving forward.
Yeah, and Brother Salam, I just wanted to make the final point as well, because as you say, right, I think Congo has been painted as an abstract problem. The way that I talk about it here, because I understand all of us can, are enjoying technology and innovation in terms of our everyday life, and it's just just like diamonds, many, many years ago in Sierra Leone, where we could, we started to be responsible with the way that we bought jewelry. We started to want to know whether our jewelry was like, conflict free, blood free. I think the same revolution kind of needs and awareness needs to be done in terms of minerals in the Congo. Like, it's lovely to be driving your latest Tesla and your iPhone. And I don't think the solution is don't buy those products. I think it's, again, call for accountability as to how those minerals are sourced, because of course, the world should keep innovating. And I think Congo can be very central to that, right? It's just the supply chain at the moment, the economic structure around how these minerals are sourced is what I have the issue with, and what I feel like people need to have awareness around so that they can make informed decisions when buying devices.
Yeah, you're bringing up a more profound point, and how we here in the United States benefit from the exploitation of people across the world for their resources, and we get to enjoy these gadgets and toys and jewelry, and we don't give any thought to how it was made and the suffering, the cost of the suffering in giving us that commodity at such a cheap price. So we need to be more aware, and I think that's an excellent point, to raise awareness about these things and to hold these companies accountable for how they receive these metals, these minerals, uh, these components that are used for our phones and cars and everyday life here. So we should think about that more deeply and be part of raising awareness on that issue. So thank you for that
Absolutely.
point. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
All right. Um, Next, we turn to another area that has not gotten enough attention. And maybe, again, as I said before, maybe this is the one of the three that gets more attention every day. We hear about it, but the way it is conveyed to us is distorted, uh, to be blunt, and to be laced with lies, to be even more blunt, because it's still not regarded as an area where a genocide is taking place. It's a struggle to refer to it as a genocide, and so we have an expert with us, who has covered this who's covered this area, Gaza and Palestine for several years. Lubna Hammad is a Palestinian American civil rights advocate, lawyer, and seasoned community organizer. She holds a Master of Laws from the University of Penn Law School. Prior to relocating to the U.S., Lubna served as legal consultant for UNICEF in Jerusalem, where she led the design and implementation of child protection programs from Gaza and the West Bank. She also worked with Defense for Children International, Palestine and Palestine. In the U.S., Lubna co-founded Adala New York, a grassroots organization advocating for boycott, divestment, and sanctions, BDS, and Yalla Indivisible, a nonprofit dedicated to civic engagement and the empowerment of Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, with a special focus on Palestinian and Arab Americans. So with that, Lubna, you have the virtual floor.
Well, thank you so much, Salam, and good morning, everyone. I think we're still in the morning. Thank you for being here, and thanks to the Islamic Center of Southern California for organizing this timely webinar. I'll begin first with an Indigenous Land and African Labor Recognition Statement, adapted from Melina Abdullah of Black Lives Matter, Los Angeles, and with the assistance of Reverend Gregory Douglas of the Native American United Methodist Church in Anaheim, and end with a brief moment of silence, if you'll allow me.
Yes.
I acknowledge that this land on which I live in Orange County is physically situated in the original ancestral homelands of the Tongva and the Hashiman peoples. We pay respect to these and all indigenous peoples, past, present, and future, and their continuing presence in the homeland and throughout their historical diaspora. We pay homage to those who were stolen from Africa, placed in bondage, falsely named as chattel, and forced into labor, who were called slaves, but never submitted to such, and have always been fully human, with an unbroken connection to the divine and to each other. We honor our African ancestors for all the still unpaid labor which built what is now the Americas. To both our indigenous and African forebears, we commit to the continued struggle for liberation and reparations, for it is only through freedom and justice that we truly give honor. I am Lubna Hammad. I'm a Palestinian, I'm a community activist, an organizer, and I hope you forgive me. I'll be reading or going through my notes just because I want to respect the time and not talk for an hour on end. Today, we gather to speak honestly and clearly about what's happening in Palestine. As Brother Salam mentioned, not everybody even recognizes what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank as genocide. They keep referring to it as a conflict, as a war, as two sides. We're here to sort of dispel all of that. So we're talking about what's happening in Palestine, past and present. I hope I won't bore you much with the details, and I'm not going to linger much on the past, but it's very important for us to understand the historical framework, so we understand why we're here today and how best we can address the situation. So calling things by their names, what we're witnessing today in Gaza and for decades across Palestine is not simply a war or conflict. It is genocide rooted in a settler colonial project. That project is Zionism. So my talk today will walk us through colonization and genocide historically, very briefly, Zionism as a settler colonial project, the genocide unfolding in Gaza, and the genocidal actions intensifying in the West Bank. So to begin with, talking about colonization and genocide. Throughout history, colonization has often led to genocide. Not immediately, not everywhere, but frequently, especially when indigenous people resisted displacement, as this was also very clearly the case in what Ms. Mundabi mentioned. When the population of the land resist, the colonizers' response is genocide, often, or elimination in whatever form, but that's still genocide. So the genocide, the examples that we have glaring at us, of course, here on Turtle Island, the genocide of Native Americans in the United States, or the Native peoples, I should say, the Herero and Nama genocide under German colonialism in modern day, what's now modern day Namibia, the mass killings in the Congo under the Belgian rule. I urge everyone to go and read more about that. It's something we should never forget, and we should definitely hold people accountable to. As Patrick Wolf, who's considered the father of settler colonialism research, put it, settler colonization is a structure. It's not an event. It's not temporary. Settler colonial projects seek to replace indigenous people, not to coexist with them. Where indigenous resistance persists, colonizers often escalate towards elimination. Now, moving on to Zionism as a settler colonial and genocidal project. Zionism must be understood within this global pattern. From its inception, Zionism was not about refuge. Was not only, let's be clear, was not only about refuge. It was about settlement, domination, and transformation of Palestine. It didn't start with Palestine, but they settled on Palestine. They considered Argentina and Madagascar and Uganda before. In 1902, Theodore Herzl, who is considered the father of Zionism, wrote to British imperial infamous Cecil Rhodes, asking him for help. And in his letter, I quote, says, "It's something colonial," referring to Zionism, not Englishmen, but Jews. And that was the trend of the day. So you can fully understand where Herzl, not support and not agree and not justify, but just to understand where he what his mindset was. So early Zionists knew that the land was inhabited. They famously described Palestine by saying, "The bride is beautiful, but she's married to another man." Thus, Palestinian existence itself was an obstacle to the Zionist dream. The Nakba of 1948, where more than 800,000 Palestinians were expelled by the Zionists, was not a tragic incident. It was a violent realization of a settler colonial project. They planned it. I'm not going to go into in depth into this now, but look up something called Plan Dalet, as in Plan D in Hebrew, Plan Dalet, and you'll see that this is something that was well planned, well in advance. Israeli historian Ilan Pape calls it by its name, the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. Genocide, therefore, is not incidental to Zionism. It's inherent to its structure whenever indigenous resistance endures. Now, if we fast forward to the current genocide in Gaza, Gaza right now is the most visible site of this colonial logic. Since October 2023, over 52,000, Israel killed over 52,000 Palestinians. And these are the official numbers. And as anyone who's in the sort of legal humanitarian aid UN world will tell you, my experience also supports that. The numbers on the official numbers you hear are usually 1/3 of the actual numbers. But this is the official number that's right now being circulated and being debated and being disputed because it was by the Ministry of Health that is run by Hamas, which has over a decade of accurate reporting, incredible reporting that was never ever challenged before. We have Israel also injured more than 117,000 Palestinians. Israel displaced 90% of the Palestinian population in Gaza, destroying their homes, their hospitals, their schools, the university systematically. This is not self-defense. This is a systematic, methodical destruction of any forms of life, making it really uninhabitable. At least this is the part that is probably most painful to me of all the pain that we're seeing. At least 52 children died from malnutrition because of Israel's man-made famine. They died, they starved to death. We could have prevented that way before it happened. And of course, the way this all of this comes back to us is it was done by our tax dollars, by the political support of our government. We'll come to that later. So Israel has weaponized starvation, disease, the smallpox now that's circulating in Gaza, and total destruction. Under the 1948 Genocide Convention, genocide includes killing people, killing group members. I mean, it's very clear in this case that they're targeting the Palestinians, whatever they are. Now it's in Gaza, but we'll see it's also extending to the West Bank. Inflicting conditions designed to bring about a group destruction. They have even joked about it. They're putting Gaza on diet, and now they're going to flatten Gaza, etc., etc. Preventing life-saving aid, and that doesn't get enough media attention. And I'll talk a little bit about what Ms. Mundabi said about the media attention or coverage. So Israeli leaders have clearly and very openly declared that they want to flatten Gaza, they want to push Palestinians into Egypt, they want to finish the job. They called us human animals, all the dehumanization. This is not a war. It's an extermination campaign targeting an entire population. Moving on now, because it's fast-paced, unfortunately, genocidal actions in the West Bank. While all eyes are on Gaza right now, genocide is also unfolding more quietly in the West Bank. Since October of 2023, almost 1,000, Israel I keep reminding myself because we always say Palestinians were killed. We always use it in the passive voice, but it's not passive. And that's why I keep correcting myself if you notice. Israel killed 870 Palestinians, including children. And by Israel, I mean the army, the Israeli forces, and the settlers. Hundreds of the settler attacks forced Palestinian villagers to flee. Israel conducted mass arrests, home demolitions, destruction of agricultural land. If anyone has seen the film No Other Land, that was one of the examples of everyday life there. If we go deeper, Israel's action in the West Bank are genocidal because they fit multiple acts under international law. So there's direct killing. No, we're not talking about the so-called combatants, which are the resistance fighters, but civilians. A lot of children have been targeted and killed in the West Bank. And that was actually even prior to October 2023. That was one of the things that led to the mobilization in October. This is not justification, it's just putting things in context. Infliction of unbearable conditions, checkpoints, military closures, economic strangulation, denial of healthcare, etc. I'm gonna try to share something with you without actually sharing my card number. But this is, let me see, okay. I don't know if you can see it. This is my ID. It's issued by the Palestinian Authority, but it's not really by the Palestinian Authority. If you see, it says that I'm Muslim, it tells you where I'm from, etc. Now you have all my details and you know that I just turned 50. But the reason I'm showing you, this is a green Hawiyya ID. It used to be orange when it was fully under the Israeli occupation before the establishment of the Palestinian Authority. Now the Palestinian Authority is the intermediary between us and the Israeli occupation. But if you're an Israeli, or if you're a resident of Jerusalem, yours will have a different look and have a different information, and that will let you pass and go anywhere you want and drive on specific roads. But this one will prevent you from going technically anywhere. You're at their mercy. So this is apartheid. This is when they strangle you with these closures, with these checkpoints, you can't go anywhere. You can't get health. You have how many women gave birth on checkpoints and how many babies died at these checkpoints because of that situation. This is systematic. It's quieter. You don't see it right away. It's not as sensational, if you will. But also, so that's also like related to other aspects of the genocidal acts. Forced displacement. Entire communities are forced to move out, like Ain Samia, like Wadi Sir. They're just like removed. And as we saw in Masafar Yatta, and as we see within Israel proper, Al-Araqib, they keep demolishing and the Palestinians keep coming back. In Al-Araqib, in south of what's called now Israel proper, they demolished that Bedouin village more than 400 times. And the Palestinians keep coming back and rebuilding. Why do we do that? Because it's our land, plain and simple. So this is not apartheid, where we're now beyond the apartheid, the different pass card, etc. We're beyond that. We're shifting towards elimination. When settler colonialism domination alone cannot succeed, the system escalates from apartheid to ethnic cleansing to genocide if need be, whatever it takes by any means. The Zionist settler project in the West Bank is now entering the final brutal phase. And everyone like me who has family in the West Bank is bracing for what's going to happen. And we call them every day and we try to see, understand what's happening. Did the settlers at the injunction near the spring move closer, etc.? Because that would tell you their intentions in the future. The goal remains unchanged, to replace Palestinians with Jewish settlers. to claim the land without its people. You probably heard the term a land without a people for a people without a land, which was an absolute and 100% a lie, but people liked it. It's very catchy. So genocide in this context is not an accident. It's a tool to complete the Zionist plan of permanent conquest. When you think of colonization, I want you to just stop and think, what do you think of your first image that comes to your mind? Is it exploitation? Is it replacement? I want you to sort of think about that and see if they're actually disconnected or connected. Because settler colonialism, if you really think deeply about it, you'll come to the understanding that there can be no settler colonialism without some form of elimination. And more often than not, that form is genocide. Sometimes it takes ethnic cleansing, which is no less horrible. And also, I also wanted to pose a very quick question for people to think about while we're finishing this talk, is how often have you heard of the Palestinian struggle framed as a religious conflict? And why do you think that framing is so persistent? And who does it serve? Especially in the US, especially in the framework of the Christian Zionist support for Israel. Keep that in mind and think more about it. So just to conclude, I don't know how much time I have left, but I think I'm still within limits. This is not a religious war between Jews and Muslims. I think the events that the Islamic Center of Southern California has held, and when we had a lot of Jewish speakers come, I think all the events that have taken place here and even in Palestine are clear indicators that this is not a Jewish Muslim thing. It's a very, very clearly and very simply an anti-colonial struggle. Palestinians, both Muslim and Christian, and we have some Jews, a very small minority near Nablus. We're all fighting for the same thing. We want our liberation from colonization. We don't want to be ruled and exterminated and ethnically cleansed from our land so that another European population can come and replace us. It's not an ancient tribal conflict. Absolutely not. And it is a modern anti-colonial struggle. So the Palestinians, what are we fighting for? We're fighting for what every indigenous people around the world have fought for. We're fighting for our land. We're fighting for our lives. We're fighting for our dignity. You've heard about now talks by the Trump administration talking to Somaliland, trying to remove the Palestinians from Gaza and resettling them there. That's a matter of dignity, not just humanity. That this is that they think that they can do that to a population without their consent. This tells you what they think of us. And so, as we said, genocide is not a metaphor here. It's not an exaggeration. It is a crime that's unfolding before our eyes. One that we morally and legally are obligated to try to prevent more of it happening and try to stop the current killing. And this is beyond sympathy and solidarity. We need action, because silence is not complicity, as Audre Lorde says. Your silence will not protect you. And I want to stop here just to get back to some of the points that I took while Niclette Mundabi was talking. So, and I want to tie that to our call to action if I can, Salam, if that's okay.
Yes.
All right. So Niclette, you mentioned the Berlin conference, and it painfully reminded me of the Sykes-Picot Agreement in 1917, which is the same mindset. Those European colonial powers, they get together, they divide the land between them, the resources, and we just have to live with it. So it's the same thing. We're faces of the same coin. Not enough media coverage. It is painfully so. Maybe the Palestinians, maybe people feel, oh, the Palestinians are now in the media, we're being covered. We're not. We're being dehumanized. The media right now, I wish they don't cover us at all. if this is their coverage. It makes us feel even more invisible because they portray what they want to see or what they think we are or what they're told to portray. We all know that the media here is absolutely biased. You just saw me correct myself 100 times today because that's what we say. Palestinians were killed. I have like, no, Israel killed Palestinians. Someone did, and someone is very known, and they need to be held accountable. We're not always in the passive. And that spills into not just the Palestinians or the Congolese or the Sudanese. It's now spilling into everything else in our life. The media now is so biased that it erases actions that happen here, whether it's the indigenous, whether it's the immigrants, anything that is not fitting with their narrative and their worldview will not be highlighted. I do also, I'm sorry if I have a few questions for you, but I do want to sort of ask people to think about how these genocides that we're talking about from the DRC to Palestine and to Sudan, like how are these anti-colonial struggles are manifesting in the US right now? How are they affecting us? Like think of the minerals, what's happening in the Congo. It's all about the race to get the minerals. But in the US, we haven't forgotten about Standing Rock or pipeline L3 pipeline demonstrations by the indigenous. 2 years ago, I was at Peach Springs in Arizona, standing with the indigenous population there, the Hakamwe, trying to defend their beach, their springs from being polluted by the lithium drilling. This is not separate from what we're living here. It's all part and parcel. Freedom of speech, you're seeing what's happening to the Palestinians, but it's also happening to other people. You don't have to be a green card holder. You don't have to be a student. It's happening also to citizens in the US who are being held and detained or harassed in so many ways. And again, this is, I'm going to quote I have to get my phone. I'm going to quote the famous Pastor Martin Niemöller. It says, "First they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I just did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." And that is it. This is the time that it's most accurate and most applicable to our situation. Now, if we're being practical, I had one more thing, and that's actually the call to action. The question that you got: why trust Western countries with a ceasefire when all they want is access to the minerals? It's not about trusting, and I don't think we should be naive enough to think of it this way. I think we should think of ourselves and of our powers and ability to effect change. We live in these Western countries. We are part of these Western countries, and we have leverage that we should utilize. So when we're talking about why are they doing, when we are in the most powerful position outside of government to effect change. And I know this sounds ridiculous right now with the current government, but believe in yourself and believe in your power more than that. This is not sustainable, and if we push back, we will be able to prevent some what's happening. So these calls to action are, I'm going to give you sort of 5 ways or 6 ways to act for Palestine today. But to be honest, thinking about it, you can do the same, almost the same thing for the DRC and for Sudan and for all the other struggles. So number 1 is, in reference to what Salam said, is speak the truth. Challenge media distortions. Name it. It's apartheid. It's ethnic cleansing. It's genocide. It's just when you see that misrepresented in your local news or even national news, write to them. It takes a minute. Just put it in ChatGPT if you want, although I'm not promoting that. But I'm saying if you're so busy and you can't, there are ways for you to get that done in minutes, and it will make an effect. Demand accountability. Call on your Congress representatives. to support an immediate and permanent ceasefire. And again, I could replace Palestine with DRC and Sudan. They're not different here. Or maybe we should call for all of them. That would be actually quite powerful. And the other thing that is specific to our Palestine situation is ending military aid to Israel, the arms embargo. I know it was floated a while ago at the Senate, but it's not. It hasn't gotten any traction. But that doesn't mean that we don't keep trying, because what else are we able to do? This is our power, and let's use it. Back the ICC, the International Criminal Court, and the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, investigations into war crimes and genocide in Palestine, Sudan, and the DRC as well. Support Palestinian-led organizations. And again, everything I say here applies to all of us. Donate to these groups, providing humanitarian aid, legal defense, political advocacy. Join the movement for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. That's an easy one. Pressure corporations, institutions, governments to end complicity with Israeli apartheid, and mobilize locally and globally. Joint protests, teach-ins, solidarity. But more importantly, there's something that I wanted to, and I'll end with this, is that people often ignore their city councils. And our city council is our first interaction with our politicians, with the political system. And if we're able to get our city councils to demand ceasefires in DRC, in the Sudan, in Palestine, that sends a signal to your representatives that this is what your constituents want. That tells them that there's enough voters, because that's what they care about, the voters getting reelected. Use that. That's your leverage. That's something that we can help our peoples back home in Africa and in Palestine and elsewhere. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lubna, for this excellent overview and analysis. I'm sure our audience gained much from that, and and the parallels are striking, like you said. You had the Berlin conference for the situation of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Sykes-Picot here, and Allenby marching on his horse in Jerusalem, boasting about that takeover, and now President Trump calling for Gaza to be turned into a Riviera without Palestinians. And it's a great idea, except it's an idea that Palestinians had themselves. It was the Riviera, and they wanted it to be a modern Riviera, but they've been prevented from doing so for so many
years. It's
the
mentality that tells you that he's thinking of it as a real estate thing, and that the population doesn't mind. It's a colonial mentality. People think of post-colonial. We're not post-colonial. We're in the middle of it. It just took another face or form, the modern colonial system, if you will.
That's right. And if we look at this map here, we see that actually the word Gaza Strip is much bigger than the actual piece of land. The strip is literally this strip right here. Oh, sorry. So it's not that big. It is literally this strip right here, which I believe is the same size as the San Fernando Valley here in Los Angeles, or even smaller than, what's the smallest state here, Delaware or Rhode Island?
Delaware.
Yeah, but that's what we're talking about. This strip that is being literally bulldozed now by Israelis and pushed, and now I believe majority of Gazans are now being pushed to the lower part of Gaza. How much land now is being occupied by the Israeli military currently?
I don't know. I think at least 1/4 of the land is under their control. But the thing is, what they do is they control the intersections that connect the different parts of Gaza, the strip. So they move they prevent movement, and they stop any form of support. People in Gaza, Palestinians in Gaza, are some. I've been to Gaza a few times, and these are some of the most resilient, genius, resourceful people you could ever meet in your life.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. But when when Israel controls those intersections, it really makes it very hard, even for people like Palestinians in Gaza, to go around it. And they still do, but it's with much more effort.
Yeah, they're very, I mean, to be starved right now and still survive, that's just a miracle in my mind. And to also watch Palestinians still have hope. I mean, here people, have a bad day and they fall into despair. And they say, "Oh, I'm annoyed by my boss," or I didn't like the lunch that my mom made for me, or the dinner that my wife made, or something like that. They go crazy. But here you have Palestinians literally just happy if they find a place to sleep,
Yeah.
and some food. And as you said, this is being supported 100% by the United States government, militarily, financially, politically, providing political cover. They keep talking about the two-state solution and that we have to support the two-state solution. The only country that's prevented this two-state solution from ever happening is the United States government, because they have vetoed every single time that the resolution for Palestinian statehood has come up in the United Nations. And I
So
wonder,
I agree with you, but there's a quick correction. I said around a fourth to a third. I'm just looking up the information. It's 50% of the Gaza Strip through their buffer zones.
yeah,
So that's one thing. And also just to mention the two-state or one state, I feel like it takes away from the agency from the population to decide what form of state or non-state they want to have. That's
oh yeah,
number
yeah,
one.
yeah,
And number two, peace is not a state. Peace
right,
is a state of mind. Like it's not, again, we're trying to think beyond those. And a lot of people tell me, like, we'll give you, like, the story of Solomon and the two moms who were fighting over the baby when he said, we'll cut them in half.
yeah,
And the one who was not the mom agreed, but the mom said no. So
yeah,
it's very hard for us. It's very, very similar for us to see our land cut into halves or cut into pieces.
yeah, and
It's been almost 100 years and we're not able to accept it, like mentally, I think.
right, and you have 2 million people living in this small strip, and
Yeah,
now they're being pushed to the brink, literally right here in the southern part, and Israeli bulldozers are coming through in the top half, like you said, probably even more now.
yeah,
And as far as a two-state solution, I'm not saying that we should support or not support. I'm
yeah,
just
yeah.
that the United States hypocrisy, the government's hypocrisy, that they're trying to form a solution, yet they veto every time there's a resolution for Palestinian statehood in the
100%.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, let's see. Do we have any questions from our audience?
Um, there was just the one that I put in there. I also just wanted to let you know, because I know that Sister Lubna Hammad mentioned no other land, and I just wanted to mention that we are going to have a no other land movie screening here at the Islamic Center this coming Friday, May 9th. The registration will be at 7:30 p.m. Then we'll pray Maghrib prayer, and then the movie will start at 8 p.m. in our ICSC lecture hall. So for those who are watching, I just wanted to inform all of you, and I hope that you can attend and learn more, inshallah.
Thank you for that announcement. Yeah, it's a week from Friday, May 9th.
Yes, it's this coming Friday.
No, the week from Friday.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, a week from Friday.
This upcoming Friday, I believe, is May 2nd. So it's May 9th. So it's a week from Friday at the Islamic Center of Southern California. And do you have a link for that, Erica, or
Um,
still working on that? All right. So,
I'll put a link in.
yeah, yeah. And then also, you mentioned the city council resolutions. Lubna, I think tremendous amount of work has been done on city councils. How do we get city councils to influence the Congress? How can we get them to do more of the of that kind of, raising our voices to the Congress?
Yeah.
Congress hasn't done anything, and they're part of the problem, but still it's important to have that exercise.
So I think people think that it's just, what's a nominal sort of ceasefire resolution by a state or by a city. Think of it this way. The city councils are the feelers that Congress people have into the community. They have their hands on the pulse in a sense when they see what matters most to them. If you have enough people mobilized, enough constituents mobilized to go to city council and to demand that they issue a ceasefire resolution that is not dehumanizing Palestinians. That's very important. So not all of them are good. But making sure that it acknowledges the humanity of Palestinians and their rights. And again, that can also go for DRC and Sudan. When they see that, the Congress people will understand that this is really important. I'll give you a very real example here in Orange County. We worked with Santa Ana City Council and we worked with Irvine. And we worked on other, I think Stanton, to get the resolution. In Stanton, it passed by the first reading and there was a second reading. The amount of pressure coming from Congress representatives on the council members to stop this was extremely telling. They did not want that to come because if their city councils, if the cities in their district is telling them that we are calling for a ceasefire, then there'll be and their constituents, everybody, like in the last year and a half, everybody has been calling their representatives and showing up at their offices, and they're saying, well, no, there are two sides, not everyone wants, like, but if you get it through your city council, then that will make it really hard for them to ignore. Then you can take that and say, here's what the majority of us want, here's what your constituents want, and that will replicate because they know that these are constituents, these are voters. And bottom line for all of these, most of these politicians is voting. Like the cycle is coming up in 2026 and with everything going on, they're paying even more attention. So if we're able to get it through city councils and now these becoming think of these are becoming like uphill battles. And again, it's not really it doesn't hold any teeth. It's just a declaration of solidarity. It just tells our community that our city councils are seeing us, are understanding that we're not invisible. We are visible to them because many of us have lost families in Gaza and the West Bank. Many of us are with families there. Many of us are literally affected, directly affected. And those of us who are not directly affected are indirectly affected. The crackdown on free speech now affects all of us, not just the Palestinians, not just the pro-Palestinians, all of us are affected in that. So when this is an uphill battle, if you win this, think of it as a small wave, but will become more tidal when more and more of these city councils, and people always underestimate and they go straight to Congress, they go straight to the Senate. This is fine, but they will look down and see what their city councils are doing. And these city council members are the aspiring Congress representatives. So for them, they have this connection with their representative. They're like their mentors in the sense if they're good friends with them or not, depends. But there's that very organic connection between them, and they're not separate. They're not different entities. All politics are local. And this is not a joke, and it's been. This is like an adage, like it's known. So start with that. Start with your school council, school board that is funding ethnic studies, and make sure that people know that you're here to stand for these rights. Then they'll start seeing you as an equal. Then they'll start taking you into account, and that will affect change. We need to, especially in this very oppressive environment, we need to be hyper local in our organizing. And city councils and school boards are a wonderful place to start with that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. We could have gone on much longer. Just, same for Niclette, we could have gone for hours on these topics, but we are short on time and we have to get to our next speaker. So thank you very much, Lubna Hammad, for, again, your presence, your commitment and conviction, and we're inspired by your work. Thank you so much. Next, we are going to turn to Dr. Alden Young to cover the situation in the Sudan. Dr. Alden Young is an associate professor of history and global affairs at Yale University. He is a political and economic historian of Africa and the Middle East. He has written extensively about Sudan, and he is currently working on a number of research projects that examine the impact of the Arab Gulf states in the 1970s on the greater Red Sea region. Alden is also writing a book on post-partition conflicts in the Horn of Africa, Sudan, South Sudan, and Ethiopia, Eritrea, with political scientist Michael Woldemariam. Alden comes to Yale from UCLA, where he was associate professor of African American Studies at UCLA and a standing member of the faculty in the International Institute. Before that, he taught for 5 years in the history department at Drexel University. He's been a fellow at Berggruen Institute and a member of the School of Social Science at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. He's author of Transforming Sudan, Decolonization, Economic Development, and State Formation. And with that, we're very honored to have with us Dr. Alden Young. Niclette came to us from Atlanta, Lubna from the OC, and Alden is talking to us from New York City.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that kind introduction, and thank you to the Islamic Center for organizing this event. And I spent like 4 years in Southern California, so I'm definitely nostalgic for LA, being in New York City right now. But in thinking about the tragedy in Sudan, I think they're deeply connected to both the conflicts in the Congo and the genocide in Gaza and Israel-Palestine. Today, Sudan is, by many accounts, the largest hunger crisis in the world. More than 25 million people are in chronic need of food. And more than 10 to 15 million people have been displaced from their homes. The vast majority of them within the country, but also in unstable countries nearby, like South Sudan and Chad. And as we speak, the civil war that began during the last 10 nights of Ramadan in April 2023, the impacts of that civil war are spreading. We see increased tensions in South Sudan, and it's very likely that what is right now a low-level conflict will intensify into a possible civil war in South Sudan as well. And all of this happened on the heels of intense fighting in Ethiopia and Eritrea. So I just want to bring into forefront that the whole region, in many ways, the greater Red Sea, is a site of intense conflict as we speak. And so, we could think also of Yemen. The current war in Sudan broke out after a very successful democratic revolution in 2019 that ended 30 years of a horrible military dictatorship of Omar al-Bashir, who had been in power since 1989. And the fighting broke out. A transitional arrangement was created between civilians and those who protested, and the civilian parties, and members of the security service who helped to overthrow Omar al-Bashir. And that agreement was overseen by the international community, particularly the United States, but also the African Union, and Arab Gulf states like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. But that arrangement only lasted for 4 years before collapsing. And it collapsed in many ways. People thought that one of the two military generals, Abdel Fattah Burhan, who was the commander of the Sudanese armed forces, and Mohammed Hamdan Daglo, who's the commander of the Rapid Support Forces, many people thought that it would be a palace coup and that one of the two men would win the war. But unfortunately, that also did not happen. And what seems like it started as an attempt at a coup spread into a conflict that now has gone on for more than 2 years and has ravaged the capital, Khartoum, and large parts of the growing regions, the agricultural regions of the country. And it's morphed with a separate and older conflict that was happening in Darfur, the most populous region of Sudan. and one which many of us in the United States have heard about before, where we see real acts of ethnic cleansing and genocide, particularly in West Darfur state, against the Masalit and the Fur peoples, who are being targeted for their land, and explicitly there are attempts to move them from their land, which is some of the richest agricultural land in the country. It also has some of the largest water reserves. But at this moment, it also has large quantities of precious metals, in particular gold. And gold is increasingly being exported from Sudan. And I can talk a little bit about how gold is driving the present conflict. But this conflict is metamorphing and spreading. It has links to the conflict in Libya. It has links to conflicts in Chad. It's become truly a regional war. And I think that's what's made it so hard to resolve. And everyone is involved. The number of forces involved in the Sudanese conflict, it is not a local war. And I think that can be a mistake that sometimes people think about. They think Sudan is far away and that these are local conflicts in Africa. But actually, it's become almost like a world war inside of Sudan itself. And so it's become, in many ways, a proxy war. The United Arab Emirates is perhaps the most known involvement in the conflict, and they are perhaps the largest supporters of the Rapid Support Forces, the paramilitary organization that has been fighting with the Sudanese armed forces. And Saudi Arabia, to a lesser extent, but also Egypt, Turkey, Qatar, South Sudan, Uganda, Ethiopia and Eritrea, the United States, even Ukraine and Russia are involved in this conflict, and Turkey to a lesser extent. And this is what made the conflict so dynamic and also very difficult for anyone to reach a resolution. The Rapid Support Forces who have been fighting the Sudanese armed forces are a paramilitary organization that was created in 2013 and then elevated to the same status as the Sudanese armed forces in 2017. And it was created in the aftermath of the partition of Sudan and South Sudan. That partition was heavily supported by the United States. And I was just in a State Department briefing that I listened to. 56% of South Sudan's budget comes from USAID. And so the ending of USAID is also causing havoc in South Sudan. But the partition, the separation of South Sudan from Sudan has led to deep instability in both countries. And in many ways has made them much weaker and much more difficult for them to deal with the current crisis. But the Rapid Support Forces were built as a way for the Sudanese regime to deal with the loss of oil revenue, which had been its main funding source prior to partition in 2011. And it was an ethnic militia built largely off of the Bagara, who are Western Saharan Arabs, both largely nomadic, both for camels and cattle. But they were armed and used to fight low-cost paramilitary conflicts along the South Sudanese border and against particularly coded African ethnic groups in Darfur. But as Sudan lost money in the early in 2013 and 2014, it entered a deep economic crisis, no longer able to access the petroleum and oil that had funded the regime earlier. It turned towards gold. And these militias became instrumental in protecting the gold mines and then collecting the surpluses from these mines. And these are not heavy-duty mines like in South Africa. These are not like large industrial mines. This is artisanal mining, often done by peasants and other unemployed people who are brought to the mines and use very harsh chemicals and very labor-intensive ways of producing gold. Sudan has now become the third largest producer of gold in Africa, behind only South Africa and Ghana. And the vast majority of that gold ends up in the markets of the United Arab Emirates, and particularly in Dubai. And this has become a major funding source for both the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese armed forces in this conflict. There are gold mines in Darfur, and there are also gold mines in Red Sea province along the Red Sea. And so both sides are able to access gold. Some of the gold is also going into Egypt, but this has become a real lubricant for the funding of the conflict. But a little bit about the origins of the Rapid Support Forces. The Rapid Support Forces were a local government militia or paramilitary force, but they transformed in 2015 when the Sudanese government, also desperate to raise funds, approached the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia and said that they would be able to supply soldiers from Darfur to fight alongside them in their war in Yemen. And so many of their officers from the Rapid Support Forces and many of the soldiers themselves gained experience and fought in the Yemeni war in 2015. And it is their return that created this unstable dynamic where you have what is now an international private military company functioning much like Blackwater or any of these other companies, the Wagner Group, inside the Sudanese state. And it is that company that has tried to seize power in Khartoum. And after the initial conflict, the war now has morphed. It was once a war sort of to seize the palace, but then to attempt to kind of govern the country as a whole. But as the conflict has gone on, both the Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Forces have turned towards mobilizing popular militias. And so they've mobilized large numbers of people to come out of their ethnic communities and their neighborhoods to fight. And in doing so, they've turned what had been a sort of fight within the army itself into a much more dangerous conflict in which many people in Sudan are saying that the people that they used to share the country with are no longer actually part of that country. So we see people in Eastern Sudan in those communities saying that the Darfurians and the Kordofanians, they were never really Sudanese. And we see similar things being said about people in Eastern Sudan and in the central regions. We see the Rapid Support Forces using this dialogue that these people exploited us. And so we're in a very dangerous situation right now where it appears the country itself might split into smaller countries. But this is particularly dangerous if we look at what happened in South Sudan, because South Sudan was independent for only 2 years before it went into civil war between the Dinka and the Nuer. And so there is no reason to believe that another partition in Sudan would solve the conflict. In fact, it might make it easier for many more groups to actually intervene into the Sudanese conflict, fueling endless cycles of fighting. And it is increasingly difficult for any of the major military commanders to control their forces. And so we're seeing acts of violence and retribution that are happening in different neighborhoods throughout Sudan, different regions of Sudan. So in Jazeera, we saw targeting of people who are labeled as foreigners. We're seeing targeting in different parts of Darfur. We're seeing massacres in Kordofan. We're seeing return to the idea of expulsions and population transfers. And all of this, in many ways, has obscured what was a very powerful moment in 2019, where we had a popular movement calling for a democratic Sudan and uniting people and activists from across the country. So one of the popular slogans in Khartoum in 2019 was Kulina Darfur, right? All of us are Darfurian. And that sentiment has been lost and has been largely obscured in the present fighting. And in many ways, people call it now a war against democracy, a war against the democratic activists, a war against what the Sudanese often refer to as Medania, or this idea that there could be a civilian government in Sudan that wouldn't be determined by the armed fighters. And instead, one of the big fears, and this would repeat long-standing practice of the international community, is that the international community will try to make peace not amongst the Sudanese people, but make peace amongst those who control the guns or control the armed movements in Sudan. And Sudan has had numerous versions of peace amongst the soldiers. And those pieces have never represented the aspirations of the Sudanese people. And one of the ways in which politicians in Washington have justified not supporting what was a powerful democratic movement in Sudan in 2019 is by saying that they have a fear of the Islamist elements in the government, that they have a fear of radical Islam in Sudan, or that they don't trust the democratic forces, that they can't be brought together into one body. All of these sort of things have justified more than 30 years of US sanctions against Sudan. Sanctions that have largely crippled the country, and I would argue have bred endemic corruption, right? Because what happens in countries like Sudan is that the economy is not controlled by the people. The economy is controlled by those who are able to obtain sanction waivers. And those people who obtain sanction waivers are often businessmen with ties to the diaspora, but also to the regimes in power. And they are able to make extraordinary amounts of profit on Sudan. And what many of us would like to happen in Sudan right now, and what we have not been able to achieve, is for the US government to pressure particularly its allies, countries that it has strong relationships with. The United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Kenya, Egypt, to enforce an arms embargo on Sudan and to stop sending in ever more complicated weapons into the conflict. So for instance, now both the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces have bought drones. They've bought aircraft. They are bombing IDP camps. Just last week, the rapid support forces ravaged an IDP camp of more than 500,000 people out of the last non-rapid support force controlled city in Darfur, Al-Fasher. The Zamzam camp was viciously attacked. And there's the use of drones to attack Khartoum, which in recent weeks has fallen and been recaptured by the Sudanese armed forces. But there's aerial bombardment being carried out by both sides. And these attacks are largely indiscriminate, and they do not differentiate between civilians and combatants. Also, the United States was the largest supplier of food aid through USAID, but also through the World Food Program. And many of us who worry about Sudan are deeply concerned about the loss of humanitarian aid, the loss of, and much of that aid has been going not only to the international NGOs, but to local Sudanese support groups, the emergency rooms, Sudanese kitchens, and Sudanese Solidarity Network is a good organization to support for those people who would like to give aid directly people in Sudan. And much of the hard work of humanitarian survival is being carried out at the most local level. And I think we hope that can be the basis after the fighting stops for the rebuilding of Sudanese civil society. Through these local self-help groups, they can form the nucleus for a new Sudan. But that can only happen if they continue to be able to get access to critical supplies. And also, if we can support Sudanese farmers who are going through the planting season now, the harvest should be in the fall, but they need critical food supplies in order to be able to bridge that gap between the planting and the harvesting seasons. And that may be possible again now that the conflict has stopped in some of the central growing areas in central Sudan and eastern Sudan. But it is still very hard to get food aid across the country. Similarly, large landholdings are still owned by the Emiratis, the Saudis, and other foreign powers. And much of the critical food that could support the Sudanese population is still being exported. And so these are things that I think we need to, pressure American policymakers to work on and to begin not to forget that Sudan is a critical issue. And also that the United States is not a neutral party in the Sudanese conflict. More than 30 years of sanctions since the early 90s have deeply weakened Sudan. And we can see sanctions almost as a form of warfare. And also the partition of South Sudan and what's happening in South Sudan, the US should not be allowed to cut off all aid to a country that it did so much to create. And I was just hearing conversations because the US government is backing out of providing food aid in South Sudan. Much of that aid is now being provided by evangelical groups. And those evangelical groups are using their role as aid providers to fulfill their own missions. And so I think as American Muslims, we should not abandon these issues, and we need to make our voice heard, both that we care about what's happening in Sudan. And in some ways, Sudan, for I think US policymakers, US politicians, is not an issue in which they feel their positions are not as strongly felt or as strongly developed as they are vis-a-vis Israel, Palestine, the war in Gaza. But instead, I think they have a feeling that maybe the American people do not care about Sudan. And that it's not an important issue at all. And so I think we actually do have a real space in order to make our voices heard, and telling our local leaders that Sudan is an important issue, and that famine, starvation, the supply of weapons from our regional actors is not something that we tolerate, and is not something that as Americans we're happy with.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Young. There's a lot really to unpack here. I remember working in the 90s, the big issue was the partition of Sudan into, with Southern Sudan, but it was used as a need for religious freedom of Christians. Do Christian Sudanese still play do they play a role in this conflict?
What's been really interesting is to think about the ways in which activist communities in the US and religious communities in the US, particularly the evangelicals, have intervened in South Sudan and Darfur, but have been largely silent in the present. And I think, we saw it even with the Obama administration. They celebrated the creation of South Sudan as the newest state in the world.
Yeah.
But when civil war broke out 2 years later, the impulse in DC was to wash their hands of the conflict. And we see it also with the Trump administration forcing the deportation of South Sudanese. And, and threatening to revoke all South Sudanese visas in the United States if they don't kiss the ring, if they don't submit to the Trump administration. And in many ways, I think that has to do with the idea that groups are passionate about Sudan for various causes that have very little to do with the actual situation in Sudan. So they quickly lose interest. So many people have been saying, where's George Clooney, for instance, in this current conflict? How come he's ignoring the largest food crisis in the world when he was so passionate about this issue, a decade ago? And I think because it's such a celebrity-driven issue, or it's driven by churches, or it's driven by, kind of abstract concepts like religious freedom, there's not a continued engagement by American communities in this conflict.
And yet, these same religious groups are now going in and using. Are they using food as a weapon? I inferred that from your comments. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, one of the problems is that because the U.S. government now is pulling back from the normal channels of distribution of food aid, which is problematic, right? I mean, I don't want to say that the U.S. government's food aid delivery system is perfect or anything like that. It's creating an opening for private charities, and particularly religious charities, to pick winners and losers in the conflict. And in South Sudan, there are certain communities that have better relationships with the evangelical churches, and there's a competition amongst churches. There's a sort of religious competition for influence and converts, and food aid is being used to support those agendas. And then some of that food aid, in any situation, some of that food aid is siphoned off and then becomes another resource in the war and in conflict itself.
And then in terms of the paramilitary group that is being supported by the United Arab Emirates and the Sudanese armed forces, um, um, who's to blame here in terms of war crimes and genocide in Sudan?
Unfortunately, both sides are committing war crimes, and we have a horrible situation in which the Sudanese armed forces created the Rapid Support Forces, much as they earlier used Darfurian Arab militias, which used to be called the Janjaweed. And they used these militias to carry out ethnic cleansing and war crimes and acts of genocide, both in South Sudan, Darfur, and many other parts of Sudan. And they combined recently in 2019, in June 2019, they committed massacres in central Khartoum. And it's very hard to parcel out responsibility between the two. But in many ways, they are a system, right? They are a network that together have committed these crimes. And they've used each other to shift blame from one to the other. And many of these are fighters that have moved from one entity to the other. And they also go back and forth. They're local commanders, so they switch sides. But they are a class of armed fighters in Sudan who have largely acted with impunity over the last 30 to 40 years, targeting civilians, recruiting children, committing massacres, and disappearing people without any real civilian check. And so what I think most of us would like to see is a Sudanese armed forces or a Sudanese security sector that can be put back under the control of civilians, right? So that Sudanese people themselves can have a say over what the armed forces or what the security sector is doing. This is a great map of Sudan. And so a lot of what was surprising in 2019 was that for decades, the violence in Sudan has happened in the Sudanese peripheries. And what happened in 2019 and in 2023 was that the violence moved to the very heart of Khartoum, in Omdurman and Khartoum North, these old cities. And it targeted some of the wealthiest and most middle-class families in these cities, but it also targeted indiscriminately everyone. And so the fighting in Sudan now is not a fighting that class privilege is able to protect you from. It's largely engulfed the entirety of the Sudanese society. And so the challenge will be, now that Khartoum has been retaken, some people estimate that maybe that people are beginning to return. And some people estimate that by the end of the year, 1 million people could return to Khartoum. But the infrastructure in Khartoum has been largely shattered. So one of the tasks for those of us in the diaspora is going to be how to support Sudanese people as they rebuild the basic infrastructure in the country.
Now, you mentioned that the UAE and Saudi Arabia have been part of the problem as well in terms of supporting the paramilitary groups. What about Kenya and Egypt? What's their role in this?
Well, I mean, Egypt particularly has also had a big role. Traditionally, Egypt has supported the Sudanese armed forces, and they've provided air cover, military support. They've bought the gold from the Sudanese armed forces. They're supplying money. And so they're also a belligerent in this conflict. And Kenya is playing a much larger regional role now. And they have been very close to the rapid support forces. And Kenya, under the government of William Ruto, has become the chief ally of the United States in East Africa. And so it just became a major non-NATO country. And it's also in a close alliance with the United Arab Emirates. And so they've also become belligerents in this conflict, particularly supporting the rapid support forces. So Kenya and Egypt find themselves, for the most part, on opposite sides of the conflict.
And in terms of arms embargo, is there anything in terms of a congressional bill that you're aware of that we can support for the arms embargo on the region?
Recently, we have made some progress. At the end of the Biden administration, they used targeted personal sanctions. And so both the senior members of the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces have targeted sanctions placed against them. But one of the challenges has been to get either the Biden administration or the Trump administration to use its leverage to put pressure on the UAE and other neighboring states, sort of restrict the supply of weapons. And I'm not sure which bill is in Congress at the moment, but I think that is something that we should be calling our congressional leaders and advocating for, is an arms embargo and also the continuation of U.S. humanitarian assistance during particularly the next few months, but also the continuation of this assistance to Sudan and I would say also South Sudan.
And in terms of humanitarian aid, is there a group that you can highlight for us to support?
I believe the Sudanese Solidarity Network is a great group to support. You can find them online, and after this call, I can send you their contact information.
Sudanese Solidarity Network. Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And they take little donations, and they provide a small grant of no more than $5,000 to different solidarity kitchens that are actually doing the work of feeding the Sudanese people.
And yeah, I forgot to ask you earlier. Is there a role for the International Criminal Court, International Court of Justice? Do they play a constructive role in this? Can they play a constructive role?
The International Criminal Court has been a bit controversial in Sudan. I mean, in many ways, one of their star prosecutions was of Omar al-Bashir in 2008. But Omar al-Bashir, of course, has not faced justice in The Hague. He ruled for more than a decade after being indicted, and he still remains in Sudan today. But I do think that, when this conflict is over, I think it's very important to collect the evidence of the individuals who have committed war crimes, genocide, used food as a weapon of war, and used collective punishment. And I think the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice are very critical institutions in trying to ensure that people don't go without responsibility in this conflict.
Yeah. Sudan, that region was, and perhaps still is, in some corners, a great intellectual source for the Islamic world. What has happened to that? What has happened to the Islamic thinking from the Sudan?
I mean, I think Sudan still is a great intellectual resource, right? I mean, much of Sudan is a huge center of Islamic debate. Also, it has very strong Sufi and religious practice. It has so many important thinkers that have come out of Sudan. But this current war has done, as so many wars before have done, they have displaced so many people in Sudan, maybe 15 million people. And so many of the intellectuals of Sudan have been forced to leave the country or to go into the countryside, and they're away from their centers of learning. And also in this latest conflict, many of the libraries in Sudan have been targeted. And so there is also violence against intellectual institutions, against libraries, against scholars. Many of the books have been sold, if not burned. And I think that's going to be one of the lasting tragedies of this current conflict.
Yeah. You know, one of the worst things that happened in Islamic history was the burning of the library in Baghdad. We had lost so much in terms of progressive thinking, in terms of applying Islam in context, and so many things that we need today. And so we resorted to minutia after that. And I know that in Gaza, the educational system has been destroyed by the Israelis. And if it's happening here in the Sudan, that's going to be another setback for us to think about in terms of restoring. I don't know how it is in the Congo, Niclette, if that's the same situation there. If you can comment on that.
Brother Salam, I'm sorry, could you just repeat the question so I understand the context?
If there's been a targeting of educational institutions and libraries in the genocide.
Not specifically, because that infrastructure was already weak to begin with, right? So when the colonialists left, as they did in other countries, they tried to either destroy what they had built before they left, or it was just very poor maintenance of what was left behind, after they left. I do think that we, as Congolese, need to maybe overhaul and create new curriculums. I'm not a fan of anything that was left behind, especially in terms of education. I do think that we have enough, with enough will, we can actually revolutionize education to kind of reflect who we are and where our priorities lie. But yeah, no, there hasn't been like specific targeting towards education per se, but that doesn't mean that there isn't work that we need to do, in that regard.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And Dr. Young, lastly, are there other groups in the U.S. that we can work with in addition to the Sudanese Solidarity Network in terms of advocacy?
Yeah, I mean, there are other groups in the U.S. that I think we can also work with. One is SAPA, the Sudanese American Physicians Association, does a great job of advocacy. And there's the Sudanese Studies Association, which also is trying to support scholars in Sudan, but also, to build these ties between Sudan and South Sudan, and, to sort of support scholars as they develop. And I often try to get information about what's happening in this conflict from an organization called the Rift Valley Institute. And they do a lot of interesting reports about what's actually happening on the ground in different regions of Sudan.
Well, I appreciate your time. I think we got to follow up, hopefully bring everybody here in person in sunny California. I see you're still wearing a coat there.
Yeah, it's still a little cold.
Still a bit nippy over there in New York.
But thank you. It'd be great to meet again and have another conversation. Thank you for organizing this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, all three of you, for the tremendous contributions for us to. There's a lot for us to consider in moving forward. And I want to also thank Dr. Lena Saraf for organizing this webinar and bringing everybody together. Erica Schley and Anne-Marie for the all the logistics and support. And we have information in terms of people to support the Sudanese Solidarity Collective, the Sudanese American Physicians Association, other Sudanese American organizations that will, hopefully will give you more information about. Other groups that are providing support for Palestinians, like Save the Children, UNRWA, among many others. And in the Congo, the Pansy Foundation. Is that the correct pronunciation? The PANZI, Pansy Foundation.
Yes, and I believe you have a U.S. registration here as well, so you're able to actually donate here in the U.S.
Okay. Hopefully we can support. I encourage everybody to not only support financially, but to call your member of Congress and to advocate that genocide be recognized in these three areas, and that the United States play a critical role in ending the genocide in all three
Can
areas,
I
among
just
other.
very briefly?
Yes.
I really, really want to thank the Islamic Center of Southern California for this webinar, because I was very well aware of the Sudan and very well of the DRC, and I would follow them, but I was very consumed with what was going on in Palestine. And this talk made me realize how much more effective we would be if we start working on the three issues whenever possible together. So I'm grateful for that. Thank you so much for organizing this.
And thank you for bringing that up, Lubna, that we've seen striking similarities, parallels in the three: the exploitation of resources in the region by external forces, the supplying of arms that ends up killing civilians, and the need for humanitarian aid in the region, and also for us as Americans to become more aware of the products we use that are produced by the exploitation and the suffering and the genocide in those regions, so that the oligarchs, the multinational corporations, the governments, the powers that be, are able to bring those resources cheaply, so that the profit margins of these companies grow. And that is the worst thing that can happen, is for us to benefit from these genocides. So it really is, to be honest with you, it's troubling for me. It's really impacting my conscience when I use these products. So we have to figure out a way to raise awareness, and at least, as was stated earlier, tell people that when they use these commodities and items, at least demand accountability, that we stop exploiting the resources and benefit from the suffering of people around the world for our consumerism. So I appreciate that. And in ending, we'll end with the verse of the Quran, Surah Al-Asr, wal-Asr, inna al-insana lafi khusr, illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihati, wa tawasaw bil haqqi, wa tawasaw bis sabr. By the token of time, indeed, people are at a loss, except those who attain to faith and do the righteous work, and they practice together mutually in patience, and they practice together mutually for the truth. Thank you very much, everybody. Salam alaikum.
Thank you so much, Brother Salam Al-Marayati. And I want to thank you and also our speakers, Sister Niclette Mundabi, Sister Lubna Hammad, and Dr. Alden Young, for your enlightening presentations and for educating all of us about these really important genocides that are happening. And as you all know, it's Genocide Awareness Month. So it's just a reminder for us to educate ourselves more about the genocides of the past and the ones that are still currently happening today. And I want to also invite all of you. We're going to have at 1:30 p.m. in an hour and a half here at the Islamic Center, we have a mural concept workshop, and it's with mural colors, MPAC, and CARE. And so I hope that you can join us, inshallah. It's going to be here at the Islamic Center, 1:30 p.m. in our lecture hall. Thank you very much, and Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you.